Carney breaks the wheel while Trump spins it. It was supposed to be a show of force. Trump, with his arms crossed and signature scowl, announced tariffs like a game show host unveiling the next surprise punishment. Steel? Taxed. Aluminum? Taxed. Cars from Canada? Taxed. The former reality TV star thought he could negotiate like he ran The Apprentice, through fear, spectacle, and humiliation of his opponents. But Mark Carney wasn't interested in playing the game. He didn't meet Trump's tantrums with counter-tantrums. He didn't stomp onto cable news and throw jabs. No, Carney did something far more threatening to the Trump doctrine. He outmaneuvered it, quietly, strategically, and most importantly, successfully. Canada's silent strike wasn't
If you're done watching corrupt elites rig the system and leave you behind, subscribe now. If you want real talk, raw truth, and zero spin, this is your channel. If you're ready to fight back, hit that subscribe button and stand with us.
It was a reinvention. While Trump bragged about making countries bend the knee, Canada was already rebuilding. The tariffs weren't a defeat. They were a signal to unlock what had long been needed. Independence from a volatile, politically poisoned trade partner. Under Carney's steady hand, the Canadian government launched a full-spectrum response, not just to blunt Trump's economic aggression, but to inoculate the country from future American instability. Provinces came together. Infrastructure projects got greenlit. International trade offices were mobilized. Canadian businesses were guided through export pivots to Europe and Asia. Federal incentives were redesigned to favor domestic supply chains. And all of it, every ounce, was done with the knowledge that Donald Trump's America could no longer be trusted as a reliable economic partner. The American dream is now a global red flag. Meanwhile, Trump's scorched earth tactics didn't just backfire in Canada. They alienated nearly every major trading nation. Germany was insulted. Japan was blindsided. South Korea walked away from the table. Mexico, long a convenient political punching bag, began signing deals without the U.S. Even the U.K., clinging to post-Brexit trade dreams, found the White House to be more unstable than supportive. What began as America First rapidly turned into America Alone. And while Trump ranted about trade deficits and unfair deals, global investors noticed something far more dangerous: inconsistency. The kind of inconsistency that tanked supply chains, froze investor confidence, and sent companies looking for new headquarters outside the U.S. Carney didn't clap back. He built forward. In Ottawa, Mark Carney wasn't preparing angry rebuttals. He was preparing trade blueprints. His theory was simple. Don't retaliate if you can reorient. Don't scream if you can outlast. Canada didn't just impose a tit-for-tat tariff. It restructured its trade psychology. The trauma being targeted by its closest ally became the fuel for a national industrial reboot. Carney leveraged this moment to spark a generational shift. He pushed for permanent mechanisms to support Canadian manufacturing, clean energy innovation, and export facilitation. He met with EU leaders and Asian ministers. He expanded market access for Canadian tech, agriculture, and natural resources. And when he spoke, it wasn't to belittle or provoke, it was to lead. Trump's empire of tariffs meets global resistance. As the U.S. imposed tariffs like fireworks on the 4th of July, the world responded, not with war, but with walls. Countries started forming trade blocs without American involvement. The EU and Japan finalized sweeping agreements. Canada joined the CPTPP with Pacific partners. Africa launched a continent-wide trade initiative. The U.S. wasn't just losing trade, it was losing relevance. And as these blocs gained traction, American exporters started to feel the pressure. Farmers from Iowa, auto workers from Michigan, tech firms in California, all discovered that Trump's bravado didn't sell products, it blocked them. Markets were closing, supply chains were rerouting, and foreign contracts were favoring countries that offered reliability over rants. Canadian sovereignty wasn't just protected, it was amplified. By the time Trump realized the impact of his own strategy, it was too late. Canada wasn't begging for a trade reset. It was already operating in a new global economy, one in which it was a partner, not a pawn. The narrative had flipped. What Trump sold as economic domination had been exposed as economic self-sabotage. And what Carney engineered wasn't just survival, it was transformation. Canada emerged as a leader in resilient trade, clean energy investment, and diplomatic credibility. The fallout in the U.S., a backlash from within, and then came the blowback from Trump's own base. American farmers, once his most loyal supporters, were drowning in unsold crops. Manufacturing giants, promised America First prosperity, were relocating to avoid tariffs. Small businesses, the supposed backbone of Trump's economy, were gutted by unpredictable price hikes. Trump tried to spin the chaos as tough negotiation, but no one was buying it. He alienated allies, disrupted jobs, and triggered inflation. His tariff war didn't make America great again. It made grocery bills higher, construction projects more expensive, and international partnerships more elusive than ever. Carney's blueprint becomes the new standard. As the world watched Trump implode under the weight of his own economic contradictions, Carney's playbook gained followers. Other middle powers began mimicking Canada's strategy, diversifying trade, insulating supply chains, investing in local production, and forming multilateral agreements that could withstand populist disruptions. Carney didn't write a manifesto. He led by example. His team's commitment to precision, patience, and partnerships proved to be a better model than any press conference podium performance. Canada showed the world that it's not about being the loudest country in the room. It's about being the most prepared. Boycott America? It's already happening. Perhaps the most devastating blow to Trump's ego wasn't from a foreign president. It came from a market itself. Quietly but surely, foreign governments, buyers, and investors began implementing what economists are calling a soft boycott of American goods and services. Not out of spite, but out of strategic caution. Why risk signing a 10-year deal with a country that changes its mind every 10 minutes? Why invest in a market where the president might target your industry on a whim? The risk wasn't just economic. It was reputational. Canada, meanwhile, filled the void. Its goods weren't under threat. Its policies didn't change with every news cycle. Its trade offices weren't operating from a position of aggression. And under Carney's watch, Canada became synonymous with something that Trump could never deliver: stability. The verdict: Trump lost a trade war, but more importantly, he lost a future. There will be postmortems, debates, and revisionist history books written about Trump's trade war. Some will claim it was all part of a larger strategy. Others will say he was standing up to globalization. But the evidence is clear. He misread the room, misjudged his leverage, and misunderstood the moment. Carney, in contrast, didn't try to dominate. He adapted. He didn't insult, he invited. He didn't break things for a photo op. He built structures that outlasted the storm. That's why, long after Trump's soundbites fade, Carney's strategy will be taught in economics classes and cited in boardrooms across the globe. Because in the end, tariffs weren't the test. Leadership was. And Trump failed it. The post-tariff era wasn't just about recovery. It became the beginning of something entirely new, a Canadian economic renaissance. As American tariffs choked traditional trade routes, Canada responded not with retaliation, but with reinvention. Carney's vision wasn't to match aggression with aggression, but to evolve past it. While Washington blared nationalist slogans, Ottawa quietly rolled out a blueprint of national revitalization. Grants were issued for domestic manufacturers. Interprovincial trade barriers, long criticized but never addressed, were dismantled in record time. Supply chains, once routed through Detroit and Chicago, began shifting to Vancouver, Halifax, and Winnipeg, and the world noticed. Investment confidence soars in Canada. Carney's calm, data-backed diplomacy earned the attention of global investors burned by Trump's unpredictability. Canada quickly became a safe haven for capital. Foreign direct investment soared. Tech firms opened new headquarters in Toronto. Green energy projects exploded in British Columbia. Quebec's aerospace industry attracted European contracts previously destined for the U.S. Why? Because Canada was predictable, stable, forward-thinking. Words rarely used in reference to Trump's America. While Trump held press conferences full of threats, Carney held roundtables with global CEOs. While Trump sent angry letters to world leaders, Carney inked long-term trade pacts with Germany, India, and South Korea. The result? Confidence. And confidence is currency. The rise of the maple standard. As Trump weakened the U.S. dollar with debt, erratic policy, and Fed-bashing tweets, Carney worked to strengthen the Canadian dollar not through intervention, but through fundamentals. The result was what analysts began calling the maple standard. It wasn't official doctrine, but it was real. Central banks began quietly shifting reserves into Canadian dollars. Bond buyers favored Canadian debt over U.S. treasuries. Canadian fintech and digital currency platforms surged in global rankings. Suddenly, the world wasn't just buying Canadian goods. They were buying into Canadian credibility. And in a global economy dominated by uncertainty, that credibility was gold. Trump's America loses the supply chain war. By mid-2025, major companies were making one quiet but seismic decision after another to leave the U.S. market out of critical supply chains. Trump's tariffs and constant threats had created a hostile environment for planning and production. What was once the backbone of global trade had become a liability. Factories in the Midwest shut down, not because of foreign competition, but because foreign investors had fled. Logistics hubs in the southern U.S. lost shipping volume to Montreal and Vancouver. International business leaders started skipping Washington altogether, opting instead for Ottawa or Berlin. The idea of decoupling from the U.S., once unthinkable, became policy in boardrooms and ministries around the globe. Mark Carney, the statesman who never needed to shout. While Trump was busy trying to make headlines, Carney was making history. His version of leadership wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on systems, policy, coalition building, and results. By 2026, Carney had transformed Canada's economic model. More provinces began adopting clean energy targets. AI and tech development were centralized through national innovation hubs. The federal government established the Sovereign Trade Resilience Fund, designed to help small exporters break into non-U.S. markets. Even Canada's most stubborn critics in the global South began courting deals. Why? Because Carney had made Canada the anti-Trump, and that identity came with real power. The global boycott of America isn't formal, but it's real. Let's be clear, no one declared a global boycott of the U.S. That would have been too obvious, too confrontational. Instead, the world simply began moving around it. Global trade conferences started to feature American workarounds, strategies for conducting business without relying on U.S. logistics or legal infrastructure. Multilateral pacts were signed without Washington. Tech companies launched new platforms with Canadian, German, and Japanese coding standards, bypassing the fractured regulatory mess in the U.S. And crucially, countries began building dollar-free bilateral agreements. The trend didn't scream rebellion. It whispered relevance decay, and that whisper was deafening in Washington. Trump's rage grows as his power shrinks. Back in the U.S., Trump was fuming, not just at Carney, but at everyone, at the Fed for not printing more money, at Congress for failing to rubber stamp his economic wish list, at allies for ignoring his calls, at the media for daring to point out the obvious, that his trade war had failed. But the problem wasn't messaging, it was math. Trump's tariffs didn't generate strength. They exposed weakness. They showed the world America's economic might was conditional, fragile, and, under his rule, self-destructive. He had weaponized tariffs like a sledgehammer. But Carney had responded like a surgeon, dissecting vulnerabilities, isolating dependencies, and stitching together something far more durable. Canada's cultural awakening completes the shift. And while all of this was happening on the economic front, something deeper was happening across Canada, a cultural awakening. No longer the polite junior partner in North America's economic marriage, Canada was stepping into its own identity. Domestic pride surged. Canadian-made goods became status symbols at home. Schools taught trade literacy. Buy Canadian wasn't a slogan, it was a lifestyle. The entertainment industry even shifted. Canadian film and television projects received global acclaim, not just for quality, but for ethos, reflecting a nation that had rejected noise and embraced nuance. Cultural exports began reinforcing the country's global reputation. Thoughtful, principled, and unafraid to lead. The new blueprint for middle power dominance. What Canada achieved wasn't just a recovery. It was a demonstration of how a middle power could outmaneuver a faltering superpower. Through smart trade diversification, infrastructure investment, global diplomacy, and civic pride, Canada had forged a path that other nations could follow. And they did. Finland, Chile, Singapore, Ghana, countries around the world began modeling elements of Canada's post-tariff blueprint. The logic was clear. When the economic giant becomes erratic, don't try to fight it. Replace it. Trump's final legacy, a blueprint for how to lose global influence. Historians will write chapters on Trump's tariff war. But the lesson won't be about toughness. It'll be about miscalculation. He misunderstood leverage. He misunderstood alliances. He misunderstood the difference between dominance and trust. He believed that economic aggression was a show of power. But he failed to see the backlash coming, not in the form of retaliation, but in the form of replacement. Canada didn't beat America at its own game. It stopped playing the game entirely and created a new one. As Trump's trade tantrums turned into economic isolation, something remarkable began happening inside the United States. Certain states, blue and red alike, started ignoring Washington altogether. Governors from border states like Michigan and New York began independently negotiating with Canadian provincial leaders. Infrastructure pacts, cross-border trade agreements, even shared energy initiatives, all quietly brokered beneath Trump's radar. Why? Because while Trump's federal government was busy burning bridges, the states still had economies to run, jobs to protect, voters to serve. And Canada, stable, predictable, booming, had become too attractive to ignore. Mark Carney, ever the strategist, welcomed these overtures with open arms but careful precision. His message was clear. We're not bypassing Washington. We're building something better beside it. That nuance made all the difference. While Trump saw the world in zero-sum terms, Carney saw opportunity in the cracks of empire. U.S. companies embraced the maple economy. It wasn't just governors. Corporate America was done waiting for coherence. Tech firms, agricultural giants, auto manufacturers, they began rerouting operations through Canada to avoid tariffs, red tape, and Trump's next meltdown. Toronto became the default hub for U.S. companies expanding into Europe. Halifax replaced New Jersey for global shipping lanes. Carney's Canada wasn't just a partner. It was a life raft for American business. Even Silicon Valley started to rebrand Canada as its northern sanctuary. AI startups migrated to Montreal. Green tech incubators opened in Calgary. Canadian universities exploded in global rankings as foreign talent sought refuge from Trump's immigration chaos and instability. A new kind of superpower emerges. Carney never wanted to be seen as an economic conqueror. That's Trump style, loud, brash, insecure. Carney's victory was quieter, but far more profound. He turned Canada into something new. Not a superpower in the traditional military sense, but a stabilizing force. A hub. A model. Canada had become the country others coordinated around. In trade, in diplomacy, in climate policy, in infrastructure. While Trump demanded loyalty and obedience, Carney offered reliability and results. Guess which one the world preferred? By 2027, nations from Scandinavia to Southeast Asia were studying the Carney Doctrine, a mix of economic decentralization, soft power diplomacy, and internal investment as a buffer against global chaos. The model was working, and it had started with Trump's tariffs. Trump's obsession turns to paranoia. Back in Washington, Trump was spiraling. Fox News tried to spin the economic collapse as a strategic reset, but Wall Street wasn't buying it. Consumer prices were up, exports were down, investor confidence had tanked. And more than that, Trump couldn't stand the fact that Canada had won. He started calling out Carney by name on social media. Canada's manipulating the world economy, he fumed. They stole our jobs. They're undermining America. But the world didn't react, because the world had moved on. Trump was shouting into an empty room. Even former allies in his own party began distancing themselves. Behind closed doors, Republican senators were quietly meeting with Canadian diplomats, looking for off-ramps and workarounds. Even they knew Trump had overplayed his hand, and Carney had flipped the table. The final nail, the global energy pivot. If there was one final humiliation for Trump, it came with the global energy pivot. In his desperation to keep the U.S. relevant, Trump had tried to bully OPEC, crash oil prices, and weaponize fossil fuel exports. But it backfired. Hard. Carney, meanwhile, had been investing in liquefied natural gas ports, clean hydrogen corridors, and mineral supply chain agreements with Europe and Japan. By 2028, Canada was the largest net exporter of clean energy tech to the G7. American buyers, blocked from Asia due to their chaotic diplomacy, were forced to turn to Canada for stable supply. And that's when it became clear the U.S., once a global energy giant, was now a dependent player on Canada. Closing. Carney's quiet victory. Trump's loud defeat. This wasn't just a trade war. It wasn't even about tariffs anymore. It was about two visions of leadership. One that screams bullies and demands loyalty through fear, and one that plans, builds, and earns loyalty through trust. Trump thought strength came from intimidation. Carney knew it came from credibility. In the end, Trump's tariffs didn't break Canada. They built it. They built stronger supply chains. They built more independent provinces. They built deeper global alliances. And most importantly, they built a country that no longer needed American approval to succeed. So while Trump raged, tweeted, and watched America's influence crumble, Carney flipped pancakes at trade summits, shook hands with world leaders, and guided a nation to something bigger than survival. He led it to leadership. And that's how Donald Trump lost a trade war, to a man who never raised his voice.